Bill 833 relating to group violence intervention, establishment of Operation Ceasefire Grant Fund.
Shall the bill pass? Sorry. Destroy the roll. The delegate from Newport News, Delegate Price.
I appreciate it, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak to the bill.
The delegate has the floor.
Thank you, and thank you, members. I'm not even going to promise to be brief, but I will be thorough. I was hopeful and dare I say encouraged when I saw the introduced version of House Bill 833. Though it is not the preferred version that I think to use to prevent gun violence, I did hear about 20 years ago that this program had had some success in Boston and Chicago. But those successes were in big cities, and honestly, our gun violence is actually more like Los Angeles. But anyway, it was a start, and I was finally glad to welcome the other side to the conversation about gun violence prevention. Because about 1.5 years ago, I don't even think that we could agree that gun violence was a problem that existed. So welcome. But then I dug in a little bit deeper, and that's when I found a couple of things. And I just want to point that out for this conversation. Previous versions of this program had it hosted with universities and community organizations. But you know what, Mr. Speaker, DCJS is better than an elected official's office. So there was that. It was good in the introduced version. It had a board with statewide input and a central location for data and planning and funding, and an annual report back to us about how taxpayer dollars were being invested and if it was working. It also defined group violence intervention. But here's what it said in the introduced version, Mr. Speaker. It said, and to minimize harm to communities by replacing enforcement with deterrence where possible. That language got changed in the new version we have in front of us. It also provided for an executive director that would hire a team and enter into contracts and have administrative duties. Research analysts would be hired with expertise in gun violence intervention. And the division being created would organize and supervise the programs, coordinate efforts for the entire state. And it had, including expressly, community member and social services providers. It was a clearinghouse for research, best practices, strategy, and evaluation, give out grants, and citizen input. But Mr. Speaker, that's not what we have in front of us. We have a substitute that went from 3 pages down to 1. And there's a lot missing in what we're about to vote on. And it's problematic because the funding would go from $27 million to $7 million. And if you look at the $60.8 billion that we spend in that budget document, that means that we are saying we're going to invest 0.012% in gun violence prevention. And that's just not going to cut it. The current bill language is not Operation Ceasefire. It takes one silo of the entire program and beefs it up. It is no longer comprehensive community-based an initiative as it once began. But it's all about where we begin, Mr. Speaker. When I sit in gun violence prevention briefings by law enforcement, by academics, some have used the peer model to describe what we should do with funding. Prevention, intervention, enforcement, and reentry. And they say the entry should be equally funding all 4 of those sections. But what we have here, Mr. Speaker, we don't start at prevention. We don't really start at intervention. We start at enforcement. And this becomes a bill of mass incarceration, much like that from the 90s war on crime that decimated communities like mine. So yeah, did the murder rate go down? Temporarily. Incarceration increased, and here we are 20 years later, where Chicago and Boston are still dealing with the same problems, because what we didn't do in Operation Ceasefire was get to the root causes, the economic and public health root causes. We cannot arrest our way out of this problem. If we take a deeper look, one of my colleagues said, the people do not want a study, they want action. And Mr. Speaker, I agree. But when you ask communities like mine, because I have, they want action that empowers them to take care of themselves. They want actions where communities can take care of themselves, not to be over-policed and to be over-incarcerated. That is not how you get to this problem. But what I do know, Mr. Speaker, is the fate of the Senate companion of this bill. And that leaves us with you all killing the Democrat version, the Senate killing the Republican version. And then you have to sit down at the table, Mr. Speaker, and that's the budget negotiations. And I would ask that we get rid of tough on crime rhetoric and take that as an actual opportunity to show up in the way that you did in the 3 pages and add $20 million to this, and then we're getting somewhere. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.